This is Sales Players, and I'm your host, Jesse Woodbury. I've spent my career selling for early stage companies, and now I'm on a mission to help reps and operators find tips, strategies, and resources for generating more pipeline, closing more deals, and building wealth in tech sales. To learn more, visit salesplayers.co. What's going on, everyone? In today's episode, I want to talk about a big challenge that we have in the tech sales space. And it's one that actually came up the other day in our Sales Players Slack community. If you're not already part of that community, there is a link down in the show notes to join for free. It's a free community of 200 plus tech sellers. It's there for networking, for sharing ideas, getting help. I try to post a few times a week with interesting topics or content that I'm working on or looking at myself. So go and sign up. The other day, a thread in the channel started on the topic of breaking out of the SDR role, the SDR function within a company. And it's a challenge that I've been aware of for a while now. Is I'm seeing more and more people, especially through my coaching program and in the community and other people in my network, that are not advancing out of the SDR role into the account executive role or elsewhere in the business. And that's a huge problem because the reality is the SDR role was never meant to be a long-term role or position in tech sales. It's really meant to be a proving ground, something that you spend a year, 18 months, no more than 24 months in the role before you're moved into a closing account executive type role or somewhere else in the business. A lot of times, if you're at a big enough company, they use the SDR team as a farm for talent. I've seen folks move into CS, marketing, solutions engineering, and other aspects of the business that are adjacent to sales. But it's a big problem if we have a group of people that are stuck in an SDR position for 2, 3, 4 years, because that is not what the original intent was behind implementing SDRs. I don't know if this is the first instance of an SDR, but the book Predictable Revenue by Aaron Ross actually talks about how they implemented the first SDR team at Salesforce and what the intent was behind it. Again, it's meant to be a farm for talent. Who shows promise? Who can we move quickly into an account executive role? Who can prove that they know how to build pipeline, prospect, do outbound calls and emails and all of the tasks that are associated with building pipeline as a seller? And then once they've proven that after 12, 15, 18 months, let's move them into a full cycle account executive role. And I think it's partially a numbers challenge as to why there's more people that are staying longer in the SDR role. But I know that it can be such a grind to be in that position and not feel like you have a clear career path to getting out of the SDR role and into an account executive role. So I wanted to take today's episode and actually share my own experience, how I broke my way out of the SDR world and got into my first account executive role and then to the enterprise account executive role. So let's talk about it. And by the way, what I said in the community, I posted that there's a few different ways that you can do this. If you're stuck in an SDR role right now and you're trying to figure out your best path forward, there's a bunch of ways you can do it. And so I'm going to talk about a few ideas here, drawing from my own experience. I want to share what worked for me. Just know that the way I did it is probably one of the messier ways to do it, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. But if it's your only option, let's go, let's figure it out. So let's first talk about what the ideal is. If you're an SDR right now, and you've been in the SDR seat for more than 12 months, it's time to start thinking about your exit from the SDR pit, right? It's time to start thinking about how you're going to get onto the path and get the exposure you need to get and the results you need to get promoted into that account executive role. So in a perfect world, you're going to deliver some really strong results from a pipeline standpoint. Maybe you're the top meeting setter. Maybe you end up being the top person on the team for that month or quarter. And leadership comes and taps you on the shoulder and says, all right, you, Mr. or Mrs. Sales Player, are ready to move on to the account executive role. That's a perfect world, a perfect scenario. And we don't live in a perfect world. And the tech selling space is not a perfect, clean-cut, linear progression type industry. It is chaos a lot of the time. And so you have to figure out if that's not the way that you're going to get into the account executive role, if performance and results and metrics alone are not going to get you there in your current company, then you have a few other options. The biggest one is actually job hopping, and I'm not one who wants to promote that. Job hopping can be very risky. If you have multiple short stints at a bunch of different companies in a short period of time, it will make you a less desirable candidate, and it will raise some flags in the interview process, especially with the recruiter screen. A lot of hiring managers are pretty focused in on how many roles you've had in the last 12 or 24 months. So you want to be really, really careful here. But my advice is if you are boxed in, there is no path to the account executive team from where you're at right now. And if that's your goal, you might want to consider switching companies and getting your name out there for an account executive direct role at a different firm. And I'm going to get into some ways that you can do that. So again, let's recap really quickly. Ideally, it's a really straightforward path. You deliver some big results for several months or quarters in a row, and you get naturally promoted into the account executive function at your company. But again, we know that that doesn't always work. And the trend lately is that there's a lot of competition for those account executive seats, especially if you're talking high mid-market or enterprise account executive roles. And so you might have to figure out how you can switch jobs, do some job hopping to get the result that you want. And then the other advice that I gave in the community was this is also a networking challenge. It's a networking problem to be solved. If you are still in an SDR seat and it's been, over 15 months, closer to even 24 months, then you really need to start thinking about how you're networking in the industry. And you might already be doing some networking, but you need to be a little more proactive, a little more intentional about how you're networking with the purpose of getting into that closer account executive role. And again, I'm going to get into some more ideas and some specific actions you can take to start that process now. But let me tell you my story. I have kind of a crazy background in the sense that my first role in tech sales was actually a full cycle closer role on an inside sales team. Now, that said, it was an e-commerce product, very similar to Shopify. It was e-commerce shopping carts. The product was like a $125 a month SaaS subscription, and I was doing full cycles. There was some inbound leads, but most of it was me calling these old lists that the company had and trying to sell people on the idea of switching over to our store from Shopify or BigCommerce, or calling net new businesses from the Whois network. If you're familiar, that's where you register a domain name. I would call into the Whois network and see if they wanted to host an e-commerce store to sell their products. So it was a cool role. It was a great way to cut my teeth in SaaS sales, but you can imagine the commissions aren't huge on a $125 a month subscription. And so I started looking to see how can I get into a more strategic role? What would it take for me to eventually get to enterprise sales, which is what I do now, where I'm selling, larger deals in the multiple six figures to Fortune 500 brands and working with household name companies to implement technology. That was my end goal. That's not everyone's end goal, but if that's where you want to get to, if you want to get to that mid-market or enterprise, then pay attention here. So what I did was I actually had a recruiter who's a very good friend and mentor of mine. I was just talking to her last week. She cold called me at my desk at that first role I was in. And she said, hey, this is going to be a weird pitch, but basically I want you to come and be an SDR for a smaller startup in Austin that is selling into enterprise retail brands. And a light bulb went off for me. And I thought, I wonder if this is my path to getting onto the enterprise side of things and learning how to build pipeline with executive level buyers at large enterprises. And so I took the role, especially because it was like a slight pay raise, but a lot of people were like, what are you doing? You're going from being a full cycle AE. Actually, I wasn't an AE, but you're going from a full cycle rep to an enterprise SDR at some startup that had just raised their Series B funding round. What are you doing? This is not typically the path you take. And I was like, no, I'm trusting my gut on this one. I think that this is going to pay off. I'm going to pay some dues in the SDR role, but I think this will eventually get me the experience I need to sell to enterprise. And so I took the role, joined as an SDR. It was a small team of people. They actually launched the whole team on the same day. We all started the same day. There were 4 or 5 of us, and we were in this tiny room in this really early stage startup company in Austin, and we were cold calling and cold emailing. In that role, I learned how to write prospecting emails that get the attention of executives. I learned a lot about executive presence. I've talked about this before, but that startup was kind of transformational for me because I sat next to our CEO, who was just a killer negotiator, and I listened to him raise $40 million in funding. And so it was a really cool experience for me. I really don't think I could have gotten that anywhere else. And I learned a ton from the leadership team there, who were all very well decorated enterprise sellers. So about 7 months into this role, the leader of the SDR team actually left to go to another company. And I put my name in the hat to become the team lead of the SDRs. And sure enough, I got a call from our vice president of sales saying, hey, you were the best choice. You put together a really solid action plan that proved that you're the right fit to lead the team at the team lead level. So I wasn't even formally a manager at that point. I was actually going to be kind of a player coach. I still had to have a territory. I still had a monthly target in terms of pipeline and meeting set and those sorts of things. But it was a step forward. And so I took that experience and actually led that team for a few years. And again, got some interesting insights on what it's like to be a manager in a company. I got to actually evaluate SaaS solutions, which is something that I think is really valuable in a career, is if you ever get a chance to explore and evaluate a software solution, you'll end up developing a better understanding of what your buyers go through. So I got to see that side of things. I got to understand the metrics that leadership was driving by. And overall, it was a really great experience. But after a while, I got an offer to go to a much bigger company, a San Francisco unicorn company with over 1,000 employees. They were on their way towards their IPO. So there was a lot of traction around this company and their product. And it was a really cool experience to go and actually help that company build out their inside sales and sales development team in Austin. And so I was in the first round of hires there and helped them build from the ground up a whole team, a whole organization dedicated to generating pipeline and closing smaller transactional sales. So that was also a really great experience. But in the big scheme of things, I didn't stay long in that role for a bunch of reasons. In that role, I was working really closely with a lot of top account executives in the industry. And so I was able to get some mentorship. And I remember one day we were having drinks in San Francisco as part of an on-site for this company. And one of the AEs that I'd gotten close to said, "Hey, you're a really sharp guy. You probably ought to think about getting into a closer role because you're going to hit a ceiling in your earnings if you stay as an SDR leader. Eventually, you're going to hit that ceiling and you're not going to be able to make the upside that some of us do. And you already have all the skills. You know how to generate pipeline. You've led teams. You understand what it's like to be a buyer. You know the industry really well. You know SaaS really well. You should totally figure out a way to get into an account executive position." So the first thing I did was I actually went to the vice president of sales at this company and I said, "Hey, I'm happy as an SDR leader. I've got a great team. I've built this whole org out, but I'm not on the right path for me. I need to get into a closer position as an AE. That's ultimately where I know I'm going to make the kind of commissions that I want to make and where I'm going to learn how to close strategic deals." And that was my goal. And this VP of sales said, "Unfortunately, you don't really have the profile. We're probably not going to promote you into an account executive. Most of our reps out in the field have 10, 15 years of experience, and you just simply don't have that. So there's not really a path for you here. Enjoy being a middle manager of the SDR team, stay put, vest, do all the things. You're going to be just fine." And unfortunately, I wasn't happy with that conversation because I still wasn't doing something that I thought was going to put me on the path to where I am now, which I'm very glad that I took action. So what I did from there was I started interviewing for jobs as an account executive. And I learned to tell my story really well. And the story is I've spent the last few years now leading SDR teams. I've been an SDR solely focused on enterprise clients. You want to bring me in as an account executive because you're not going to have to worry about my ability to generate pipeline, which is a big headache for sales leaders. They hire a lot of account executives who don't know how to prospect well, or they haven't done it in many years. They sometimes feel like they have to micromanage reps that don't proactively go out and cold call and send outbound emails and those sorts of things. So a reminder here, I just want to call this out, that the SDR skill set is very, very important. And it's a skill set that you're going to carry with you for the remainder of your career. Even today in my role, I'm still making cold calls. I still send cold emails. I'm still using LinkedIn to try to network with executive buyers, but I'm also responsible for closing the entire deal cycle. And that's where you're going to get the big lucrative commission checks that if you are someone who's heading in that direction, then that's where you ultimately want to get to. So eventually, after some time, I found a startup out of Austin, an even earlier stage startup that was looking for an enterprise account executive. And they hired me into that role because they knew I was able to come in and execute on the pipeline front. They knew I had exposure and experience with enterprise software. And frankly, because they were a startup, I don't think people were necessarily banging down their door to go work for them. No one really knew who they were at that point. I was really fortunate. I actually met the founder on a bike ride in Austin. This is a true story. I was riding my bike through a bike park in the west part of Austin, and the founder was on the trail with me, and we started talking and just socializing a little bit. And eventually the conversation turned to, "Hey, I founded a startup and I'm looking for my first enterprise AE hire." And so that's the story of how I broke out of the SDR world and landed my first spot as an enterprise account executive. Now, if you know my story, that startup didn't last forever. But at that point, I had the title and I was able to go and parlay that experience into my next enterprise AE role. And that takes us pretty much to today. I've stayed as an enterprise account executive intentionally. So that's my story. That's one idea for how you can network your way. And again, I got a little bit lucky because I met this founder at the bike park, but it's proof that you should open your mouth and talk about what your goals are. If you meet somebody somewhere, especially if you're in one of the tech-centered cities like San Francisco, Austin, Seattle, New York, get yourself out there and start networking with sales leaders. Show them that you're capable and intelligent and driven, and you've got 80% of the skill set already because you know how to generate pipeline at the enterprise level. So a lot of it's going to come down to networking and finding your way towards business leaders, founders, VPs of sales, CROs, other executive leaders in your network that can help you get out of the SDR role and into a full cycle AE role. I often advise clients to go out and look at the lists of new startups that were recently funded. Now, remember that I typically don't recommend joining a startup before the Series B funding round. The reason for that is because any earlier than that, they may or may not have full product market fit. It's definitely a little bit more risky, but I also wouldn't raise the bar too high. I think you need to set realistic standards, but also know that you might get more conversations if you're talking to the founder themselves at an early stage company, because that person can bring you in as an account executive, even if you've never closed anything before in your career. Another piece of advice I always give people, and this is something that I did implement when I was an SDR, was I stayed involved in the deal cycles, especially the most meaningful ones for the company. Now, I know that is a question of bandwidth and time, and sometimes SDR leaders out there don't like it when SDRs join later stage calls. And I also know that sometimes the account executives or the field sales executives don't like it when SDRs join in the later parts of the calls. But you really need to demand that from your team and assert yourself into those conversations as best as you can. Build genuine relationships with the prospects who you book these meetings with. And then you'll be able to earn a seat at the table in the remainder of that deal cycle and conversation. And one example of where I deployed this was there was a day where the field rep couldn't show up to the call. So I actually ran the first discovery call myself as an SDR. Now, not every company is going to let you do this, but it's worth a try. You really have nothing to lose. And as long as you get permission or you have the sales executive's permission or your leadership's permission to do this, this will pay dividends because you'll actually show that you are capable of running a discovery call. You'll show that you're already starting to think ahead towards your next role. So I always encourage people to be as involved and proactive in the deals as possible, because eventually what's going to happen is if you generate enough pipeline for your field sales team, they're going to get so busy that they might even kick you a deal. So really work to get involved. There's some other things you can do too. Again, I've talked about me becoming a team lead. I think the team lead of an SDR role is a slight step up from being an SDR itself. And you can then parlay that leadership experience into an account executive role by showing all the things you learned as a leader and all the new understanding you have as someone who managed a team and managed processes and those sorts of things. I think a few other things you can work on as an SDR that will really set you apart from your peers is learning how to use your systems really well, all the tools in your tool stack. If you can invest more time than your peers in your Salesforce or your HubSpot or your Gong or your Chorus or whatever you use for that, if you're a power user of Outreach or SalesLoft or any of the other products in the GDM tech stack, that stuff also does get recognized by leadership. And I know that folks that are proactive there and that invest the time in being operationally efficient in their team, they tend to get the attention of leadership, which can ultimately result in getting promoted internally to that account executive or closer role. So again, just to recap everything, this is a huge challenge right now. If you've been in the SDR seat for 15 months or more, it's time to start thinking about your exit. And also, your exit doesn't have to be to the account executive position. Maybe you're interested in joining the demand gen team or the sales engineering or solutions consulting team, or maybe the sales ops or revenue operations side of the business is looking for someone who has the direct experience. If you remember that the SDR position is meant to be a proving ground, it's meant to be a talent farm for other aspects of the business, then you can operationalize that to find your specific path. So I hope that helps people out there. If you're someone who feels stuck in the SDR role, I want you to reach out to me and get in touch. My one-on-one coaching program is designed to help you fast track your tech selling career, whether that's in the interview side of things, or you want to just kill it in terms of your internal QBR presentations. If you want new ideas for how you can build more pipeline, how you can be more assertive and involve yourself more in the deals that you helped source, then hit me up. You know where to find me, and thanks for tuning in.